She waited 15 years to reunite with her first love, but nothing was as easy as she had imagined. The lighthouse stood like a sentinel against the darkening sky, its beams sweeping across the churning waters below. Mia Parker watched that familiar light from her car, fingers tightening around the steering wheel as she took her first real breath since crossing the town limits. 15 years away, and Clearwater Haven hadn't changed, but she certainly had. At 33, Mia had built the life she'd always dreamed of: senior editor at a prestigious publishing house in Boston, a sleek apartment overlooking the harbor, friends who understood ambition. Yet here she was, drawn back to the place she'd fled all those years ago, feeling like the scared 18-year-old who'd packed her bags in the middle of the night. Just get through the week, she whispered to herself, finally releasing the wheel and reaching for the envelope on the passenger seat. Inside was the deed to her childhood home, now hers, along with everything else her father had left behind. Her father. The thought of him sent a cold wave through her chest. 2 weeks gone, and she still expected to hear his gruff voice when she called her childhood number, telling her not to worry, that he was managing just fine without her visits. She hadn't been there when it happened. The guilt of that sat heavy on her shoulders as she finally stepped out of the car, the coastal wind immediately tangling in her hair, carrying the scent of salt and memories. The house looked smaller than she remembered, weathered blue paint peeling around the windows, the porch swing creaking in the breeze. Her mother had planted hydrangeas along the walkway before cancer took her when Mia was 16. Somehow, they were still alive, their blue heads nodding as if in recognition. Inside, dust motes danced in the afternoon light streaming through the windows. Her father had never been one for deep cleaning, but the untouched quality of the rooms told her he'd stopped caring long before the heart attack that took him. Photographs lined the mantel, her mother's bright smile, Mia in her graduation cap, fishing trips with her dad. And there, half hidden behind the others, a faded Polaroid of 2 teenagers on the pier, arms around each other, laughing into the camera as if they had forever. Ethan Miller, the name she'd buried deep, only to have it resurface in dreams that left her restless and reaching for someone who wasn't there. Her first love, her only real love, if she was being honest with herself, something she rarely was when it came to him. Should have thrown that out years ago, she muttered, turning away from the smiling faces frozen in time. Yet she couldn't help but wonder what had become of him. Had he left Clearwater Haven too? Found someone who could love him the way he deserved? The thought sent an unexpected pang through her chest. Night fell quickly, as it always did near the coast. Mia found herself wandering to the kitchen, opening cupboards that held the same chipped mugs and mismatched plates from her childhood. The refrigerator hummed in the corner. Someone had cleaned it out, probably one of the neighbors. Small-town kindness that made her throat tighten. She'd forgotten what that felt like. Sleep came fitfully, her body restless in her old bedroom, still decorated with faded posters and dusty trophies. When morning broke, she rose with the determination to face what she'd been avoiding, her father's final resting place. The cemetery sat on a gentle hill overlooking the bay, rows of headstones catching the early light. Mia picked her way through them, clutching a small bouquet of store-bought flowers that suddenly seemed inadequate. When she reached the fresh mound of earth marked with her father's name, Robert Parker, beloved father and friend, she stopped short. Someone had been there before her. A beautiful arrangement of sea lavender and beach roses, her father's favorites, lay against the simple headstone, their stems tied with twine in an intricate sailor's knot that few in town knew how to tie. He comes every morning, you know. Mia startled, turning to find Mrs. Holloway, her father's neighbor for 30 years, standing a few feet away. The woman had aged, silver hair now completely white, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. Who does? Mia asked, though something in her already knew the answer. Ethan Miller. He looked after your father these past few years. Took him fishing when Robert's hands got too shaky to bait his own hook. Fixed that leaky roof last winter. Mrs. Holloway studied Mia's face with the frankness of someone who had known her since she was in diapers. Your daddy never said it, but I think he saw Ethan as the son he never had. The words landed like stones in still water, ripples of guilt expanding through her chest. While she'd been building her life elsewhere, sending obligatory holiday cards and making brief summer visits, Ethan had been here, caring for the father she'd left behind. Is he? Mia hesitated, not even sure what she wanted to ask. Is he still in town then? Mrs. Holloway's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Never left. Took over his grandfather's boat repair business down at the marina. Does well for himself. She paused, then added softly, never married, though. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? The implication hung in the air between them. Mia turned back to her father's grave, unable to meet the older woman's knowing gaze. I'm sure he's moved on with his life, she said, more to convince herself than anything. Maybe, Mrs. Holloway shrugged. Or maybe some people just love once, Mia Parker. Real love leaves marks that don't fade, no matter how hard we try to cover them up. Mia watched the older woman walk away, her words echoing. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of the sea over the hill, and with it, memories of summer nights spent on the pier with Ethan, planning futures that never came to be. They'd talk for hours about the lives they'd build together. His boat repair shop, her little bookstore, a house overlooking the water where they'd raised children who would know every tide pool and hidden cove. Dreams she'd discarded when panic seized her at 18, when her father's quiet expectation that she'd stay in Clearwater Haven forever had suddenly felt like chains around her ankles. She'd fled in the night, leaving only a hastily written note that explained nothing and everything. I can't stay here. Please don't ask me to. 15 years of silence followed. 15 years of building walls around the part of her heart that still belonged to this place, to him. Standing at her father's grave, those walls began to crumble. What would happen if she saw Ethan now? Would he hate her for leaving without a real goodbye? Would his eyes still crinkle at the corners when he smiled, the way they did in her memories? As Mia laid her own flowers beside the ones Ethan had left, she made a decision. Before she sold the house and returned to Boston, she needed to face the past she'd been running from. She needed to see Ethan Miller one more time, even if only to properly say goodbye. What she didn't know, as she walked back down the cemetery hill toward town, was that fate had already set their reunion in motion. By sunset, everything would change. The Salty Dog Cafe hadn't changed in 15 years. The same weathered signs swung in the afternoon breeze. The same nautical knots and faded photographs adorned the walls. And judging by the aroma of fresh sourdough and coffee, Mrs. Lawson was still baking her famous bread in the kitchen. Mia hesitated outside, fingers brushing against the driftwood handle of the door. This place had been their sanctuary once, hers and Ethan's. The corner booth by the window had practically been reserved for them during high school, where they'd share a plate of cinnamon rolls and plan impossible futures over homework. It was where he first held her hand beneath the table, where he'd kissed her forehead when she cried after her mother's funeral, where she'd told him she'd love him forever. Another promise she'd broken. You going in or just admiring the view? A voice called from behind her. Mia turned to find Sam Reynolds, who'd owned the local hardware store since before she was born. His beard was more salt than pepper now, but his eyes still twinkled with the same mischief. Just gathering courage, she admitted. Sam nodded as if he understood exactly what she meant. Town's been talking about you being back. Your daddy would have been glad to see you home, even under these circumstances. He paused, then added, lots of people would. The implication wasn't lost on her. Before she could respond, Sam tipped his cap and continued down the boardwalk, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the memory-laden cafe before her. Taking a deep breath, Mia pushed the door open. The little bell above tinkled, announcing her arrival to the half-dozen patrons scattered around the cozy space. A few glanced up, recognition dawning on their faces, followed by the polite nods of people who recognized the prodigal daughter but weren't sure if they should acknowledge her return. Mia kept her head down, slipping into an empty table near the back. Not their old booth, which she noticed was currently occupied by a young couple who reminded her too much of what she and Ethan had once been. She ordered a black coffee when the waitress came by, avoiding the woman's curious stare. That's when she heard it. A deep, warm laugh that sent a jolt through her system. Her heart recognized it before her mind could catch up, the sound triggering a cascade of memories. That same laugh against her ear as they swayed at prom, echoing across the water as they raced their kayaks to the hidden cove, muffled against her neck in the back of his grandfather's truck under a sky full of stars. Ethan was here, in the cafe, right now. Mia froze, her back to the voice. He was seated somewhere behind her, by the sound of it, talking to someone she couldn't see. Panic rushed through her veins. She wasn't ready for this. Not here, not without preparation, not with an audience of townspeople who'd witnessed her departure and his heartbreak. Yet she couldn't help but strain to hear his words, carried to her on the quiet afternoon air. I don't know, Mark. At some point, you've got to let go of the past, you know? Ethan was saying, his voice deeper than she remembered, but with the same gentle cadence. Keep looking back and you'll miss what's right in front of you, says the man who still hasn't sold his grandfather's boat. His companion retorted, You're one to talk about letting go. A pause, then a sigh from Ethan. That's different. Some things are worth holding on to. Others just aren't meant to be. The words struck Mia like physical blows. Was he talking about her? About them? The thought that she might be something he'd categorized as not meant to be sent an unexpected surge of pain through her chest. Heard Mia Parker's back in town, Mark said, causing Mia to sink lower in her seat. You gonna talk to her? Another pause, longer this time. When Ethan finally spoke, his voice was so quiet she had to strain to hear it. What would be the point? She made her choice a long time ago. You never did tell me why she left like that. One day you two were planning forever, the next she was gone. Because I don't know why. Ethan replied, a thread of old hurt woven through the words. She never said goodbye, never explained. Just vanished. Left me standing at the lighthouse where we were supposed to meet, holding a ring and looking like the world's biggest fool. A ring. He'd had a ring. The realization hit Mia with such force that she gasped audibly, the sound carrying in the quiet cafe. In the sudden silence that followed, she knew she'd given herself away. There was nothing to do but leave, immediately. Gathering her purse with trembling hands, she rose from her chair, keeping her face averted from where she knew Ethan must be sitting. She dropped a $10 bill on the table for a coffee she hadn't touched and made for the door with quick, determined steps. Just as her hand touched the driftwood handle, the bell above the door jingled as someone else entered, momentarily blocking her escape. Mia looked up, startled, into the face of an elderly woman who'd been her English teacher, Mrs. Abernathy, who beamed in delighted recognition. Mia Parker. My goodness, look at you. I'm sorry, I have to go. Mia cut her off, slipping past the bewildered woman and out onto the boardwalk. But those few seconds of delay had cost her dearly. As she hurried away, she felt the weight of eyes on her back. She didn't need to turn around to know that Ethan had seen her, had realized she'd been there all along, listening. The knowledge burned through her like wildfire, leaving nothing but ash in its wake. She walked blindly, feet carrying her automatically to the pier where they'd spent so many sunset hours. The old wood creaked beneath her weight as she made her way to the very end, where the vast expanse of ocean stretched before her. Only then did she allow herself to fully feel the impact of what she'd learned. Ethan had been going to propose. While she'd been planning her escape, packing her bags in secret, he'd been choosing a ring, planning a future. The weight of it crushed against her chest until she could barely breathe. What kind of person did that make her? What kind of coward? The sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of fire. Mia watched it, remembering how she and Ethan had counted sunsets like treasures, each one unique, each one theirs. Now she counted the minutes until she could retreat to her father's house, pack up what needed to be packed, and leave this town again, this time with no illusions about what she was running from. By the time dusk settled over Clearwater Haven, Mia had composed herself enough to make the walk back to her father's house. The streets were quiet, most families gathered around dinner tables or settling in for the evening. Lights glowed warmly from windows, making her feel like an outsider looking in, which, she supposed, she was. The house was dark when she arrived, the porch light having burned out years ago, according to Mrs. Holloway. Mia fumbled with her keys in the growing darkness, finally managing to unlock the door and step inside. She didn't bother turning on lights immediately, instead leaning against the closed door and letting her eyes adjust to the dim interior. That's when she noticed it, a white rectangle on the floor just inside the door. Someone had slipped something beneath the door while she was out. With a sense of foreboding, Mia knelt and picked it up. It was an envelope, yellowed with age, her name written across the front in a familiar, slanted script she would have recognized anywhere. Ethan's handwriting, though younger, less assured than the man he'd become. With trembling fingers, she opened it and extracted a single sheet of paper, folded in thirds. The date at the top made her heart stutter. June 15th, 15 years ago. The night she left. My Mia, by the time you read this, I'll have asked you the biggest question of my life. I'm writing this now, sitting on our lighthouse steps, waiting for you to meet me here at sunset like we planned. I've got Grandpa's ring in my pocket, the one he gave Grandma during the war before he shipped out. He told me real love waits, no matter how long or far. I know ours will too. I see the doubt in your eyes lately. I know you're scared of staying, of becoming another Clearwater Haven story that never changes. But I need you to know something. Loving you doesn't mean keeping you. It means finding a way for both our dreams to grow together. So if Boston is where you need to be, then Boston is where we'll go. If it's New York or Paris or the moon, I'll find a way to follow. The shop, the boats, the plans, none of it matters without you. I'll build boats anywhere, Mia, but I'll only build a life with you. When you get here tonight, before I even show you the ring, I'm going to tell you all this. But I wanted to write it down too, so on the days when life gets hard and choices seem impossible, you can look at these words and remember, you are never trapped with me. We'll find the way together. Forever yours, Ethan. Mia sank to the floor, the letter clutched against her chest, tears flowing freely now. He had been willing to leave everything behind for her. While she'd been convinced he was the chain that would keep her tied to this town forever, he'd been preparing to follow her anywhere. And she had never given him the chance to tell her. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows with a coming storm. But the real tempest was inside Mia's heart, where 15 years of certainty about her choices crumbled in the face of a truth she'd never known. She had made a terrible mistake. And now, sitting alone in her father's empty house with a letter that arrived 15 years too late, she wondered if some damage could never be undone, if some choices carved paths too divergent to ever find their way back to each other. Morning arrived with the kind of coastal clarity that made Clearwater Haven famous. Crisp air, sunlight dancing on gentle waves, fishing boats already dotting the horizon. Mia had barely slept. Ethan's letter read and reread until the paper grew soft in her hands. His words haunted her dreams when exhaustion finally claimed her. Loving you doesn't mean keeping you. She stood at the kitchen window, clutching a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold. The decision had formed sometime during the restless night. She needed to see him, to explain, to what? Apologize for 15 years of silence? Ask forgiveness for a choice that had altered both their lives irreparably? The thought sent anxiety spiraling through her chest. But the letter in her pocket gave her courage. If he had loved her enough to follow her anywhere then, perhaps some small ember of that feeling remained. Enough, at least, for him to hear her out. The marina sat at the eastern edge of town, a collection of weathered buildings and swaying docks where the fishing fleet mingled with pleasure craft. Miller's Boat Repair had been Ethan's grandfather's business for decades before Ethan was born. Now, according to the freshly painted sign, it was simply Miller Marine. Mia parked her car at the edge of the lot, steeling herself before making the walk down the main dock. Several people nodded in recognition as she passed, but she kept her focus on the large boathouse at the end, its doors thrown open to catch the morning breeze off the water. The sound reached her first, rhythmic sanding, the kind that required patience and precision. Then the smell of sawdust and varnish, so familiar it nearly brought tears to her eyes. How many afternoons had she spent perched on a workbench, watching Ethan help his grandfather, learning the craft that would eventually become his livelihood? She paused at the entrance, momentarily hidden by the shadow of the doorway. Inside, Ethan stood with his back to her, working on what appeared to be an old wooden sailboat. At 33, he had filled out from the lanky teenager she remembered, broader shoulders beneath a faded t-shirt, strong arms moving with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. His dark hair was shorter now, but still curled slightly at the nape of his neck where sweat had dampened it. For one selfish moment, Mia allowed herself to simply watch him, to catalog the changes 15 years had wrought. Then she took a deep breath and stepped into the light. "Hello, Ethan." He stilled at the sound of her voice, but didn't immediately turn. The sanding block in his hand lowered slowly as his shoulders tensed. When he finally faced her, his expression was carefully neutral, a mask she could see cost him effort to maintain. Mia, just her name, spoken in that voice that had deepened with age but still carried the same warm timbre. His eyes, the blue of deep water, took her in with a single sweep, revealing nothing of his thoughts. I wondered if you might stop by. Not hoped, not wanted, just wondered. The careful distance in his voice made her chest ache. It's good to see you, she offered, the words woefully inadequate. A slight lift of his eyebrow. Is it? The challenge in his voice was gentle but unmistakable. This wasn't going to be easy. She hadn't expected it would be. Mia took another step into the workshop, glancing around at the tools hanging in precise order, the half-finished projects, the craftsmanship evident in every corner. You've done well for yourself, she said, gesturing to the space around them. Your grandfather would be proud. Something flickered across his features, a softening, perhaps, at the mention of the old man who had raised him after his parents' deaths. I hope so. He set down his tools, wiping his hands on a rag tucked into his back pocket. I'm sorry about your dad, Mia. Robert was a good man. There was genuine sorrow in his voice that caught her off guard. Of course, according to Mrs. Holloway, Ethan had been close to her father in those final years. The thought sent a fresh wave of guilt through her. Thank you. And thank you for looking out for him. Her voice caught. Mrs. Holloway told me. Ethan shrugged, the gesture dismissive but not unkind. He did the same for me when Grandpa died. That's what people do here. The unspoken implication hung between them. That's what people who stay do. An awkward silence settled between them, 15 years of unspoken words pressing against the air. Mia's fingers closed around the letter in her pocket, but something in Ethan's careful distance kept her from mentioning it. Not yet. What brings you to the shop? He asked finally, reaching for a water bottle and taking a long drink. His tone was polite, almost professional, the way he might speak to any customer who wandered in. Mia hesitated. The practiced speech she'd rehearsed on the drive over suddenly seemed hollow and self-serving. I just wanted to see you, she admitted instead. It's been a long time. 15 years, 2 months, and about 12 days, he replied without hesitation, then looked away as if embarrassed by the precision of his count. Give or take. The fact that he knew exactly how long it had been struck her with unexpected force. Before she could respond, the rumble of thunder sounded in the distance. Storm coming in, Ethan noted, glancing toward the open doors where dark clouds were gathering on the horizon. They move fast this time of year. He turned back to the boat, running his hand along the smooth wooden hull. This was your dad's, you know. He asked me to restore it last year. Said he wanted to take it out one more time when it was finished. A sad smile touched his lips. Guess he ran out of time. Mia stepped closer, recognizing now the small fishing boat her father had owned since before she was born. The one he'd taught her to sail in. You're still working on it, even after he's gone? Ethan nodded. A promise is a promise. The simple statement held such weight that Mia felt tears prick at her eyes. Promises kept and promises broken. Wasn't that what stood between them now? I found your letter, she said abruptly, unable to hold the words back any longer. The one you wrote the night I left. Ethan's hand stilled on the boat's hull. Oh, just that single syllable, revealing nothing. You were going to propose. It wasn't a question. Yes. He still wouldn't look at her. And you were willing to leave Clearwater Haven, for me. At this, he did turn, his expression unreadable. Does it matter now? It matters to me, Mia said, her voice trembling slightly. I never knew. I thought. You thought I wanted to trap you here. He finished for her, the first crack in his composure showing through. That I couldn't understand why you needed to leave. That I was just another part of this town you needed to escape from. There was hurt there, but also a weariness that suggested he'd had this conversation with himself many times over the years. I was 18 and terrified, Mia whispered. After Mom died, watching Dad retreat into himself, into this town, I felt like I was disappearing too. Like if I didn't get out then, I never would. You could have told me. For the first time, real emotion colored his voice. Not anger, but a profound sadness that was somehow worse. You could have given me a chance to understand. To help. Instead, you just vanished. Left me standing at the lighthouse like a fool. The crack of thunder outside punctuated his words. Closer now. A few raindrops spattered against the dock. I know, she acknowledged, the weight of her choices heavy between them. I've spent 15 years building a life I thought I wanted, and I've done well, Ethan. But there's always been this empty space. This wondering. Something flashed in his eyes. Hope, perhaps, quickly guarded. And what exactly are you wondering, Mia? Why I didn't chase after you? Why I stayed in this town you couldn't wait to leave. No, she said softly. I wonder if you ever forgave me. If you could. Before he could answer, the skies opened with the sudden fury of a coastal storm. Rain lashed against the boathouse, driven by wind that sent tools rattling on their hooks. A particularly strong gust sent spray across the threshold, causing them both to step back reflexively. We should close the doors, Ethan said, already moving toward them. Mia hurried to help, struggling against the wind to pull one of the heavy wooden doors closed while Ethan managed the other. Together they secured the latches, shutting out the worst of the storm but leaving them in semi-darkness, the only light coming from fixtures overhead and the occasional flash of lightning through high windows. They stood close now, the sudden effort and the drumming rain creating an unexpected intimacy. Without the distance between them, Mia could see the fine lines around his eyes, the slight silver threading through the hair at his temples. Evidence of 15 years lived without her. We should wait it out, Ethan said, stepping back and gesturing to the boat. Might as well be comfortable. These summer squalls don't usually last long. He helped her climb into the partially restored vessel, its hull solid though the interior was still mostly stripped. They sat on opposite benches, the boat creaking gently, as if it were on water rather than sawhorses in a boathouse. The sound of rain on the roof filled the silence between them. I never forgave you, Ethan said finally, his voice quiet but clear above the storm. Because I never blamed you for leaving. I blamed you for not trusting me enough to tell me why. He looked at her directly now, years of hurt in his eyes. I would have followed you anywhere, Mia. Anywhere. I know that now, she whispered, the letter await in her pocket. But would you have been happy? Really? Your whole life is here. Your business, your friends, your memories. My whole life was you, he corrected gently. The rest was just details. Lightning flashed, illuminating his face in stark relief. The openness there, the vulnerability it cost him to admit this even now. In that flash, Mia saw not just the man before her, but the boy she'd loved, the future they might have had, the parallel life that had continued without her. And in the darkness that followed, she felt the tears come, for what was lost, for what might still be possible, for 15 years of running from the one person who had promised to run with her. 3 days had passed since the storm at the boathouse. 3 days since Mia and Ethan had sat in her father's half-restored boat, the rain drumming above them like a heartbeat, speaking truths they'd avoided for 15 years. They'd parted awkwardly when the storm cleared, neither quite sure what came next in this fragile, newfound honesty between them. Mia stood in her father's attic now, dust motes dancing in the light from the single window as she sorted through cardboard boxes. She'd come up here looking for distraction, for purpose, something to occupy her hands while her mind circled endlessly around Ethan's words. My whole life was you. The rest was just details. In a box marked simply Mia, she found remnants of her childhood meticulously preserved, report cards, art projects, a shoebox of seashells collected on countless beach days. Her father, so emotionally reserved in life, had kept everything. The realization made her throat tighten. At the bottom of the box lay a faded map of Clearwater Haven, hand-drawn on butcher paper. Mia unfolded it carefully, her heart stuttering as she recognized her own teenage handwriting alongside Ethan's more angular script. They'd created it the summer before she left, the Mia and Ethan memory map. It proclaimed in exuberant lettering across the top. Every significant moment of their relationship had been carefully plotted. First meeting, 3rd grade, Mrs. Wilson's classroom at the elementary school. First kiss, summer before 9th grade at the county fair. First I love you at the old oak tree behind the library. Dozens of stars and hearts marked places that had mattered to them, transforming the small coastal town into a constellation of memories. Her fingers traced the largest star, drawn at the edge of the peninsula, our future home. They'd found the abandoned property on one of their hikes, an old caretaker's cottage near the lighthouse, long since fallen into disrepair. In their teenage dreams, they'd restore it someday, build a deck facing the ocean, raise children who would grow up knowing the rhythm of the tides. A loud knock at the front door startled her from her reverie. Carefully folding the map, she tucked it into her pocket and made her way downstairs, brushing dust from her clothes. Mrs. Holloway stood on the porch, a covered dish in her hands. Thought you might be tired of takeout by now, she said by way of greeting. Chicken pot pie, your father's favorite. Mia accepted the dish with genuine gratitude. Thank you. Would you like to come in? The older woman shook her head. Not today, dear. But I did want to tell you something. She paused, her eyes sharp and knowing. The lighthouse keeper's cottage. The town's historical society has been trying to save it from demolition. The vote's on Friday. She gave Mia a significant look. Ethan's been leading the preservation effort for years. With that cryptic statement, Mrs. Holloway departed, leaving Mia standing in the doorway, the warm dish in her hands and a strange feeling blossoming in her chest. The lighthouse keeper's cottage, their cottage. Ethan had been trying to save it. Decision made. Mia placed the pot pie in the refrigerator, grabbed her car keys, and headed out. She wouldn't call first. She needed to see the places herself, to understand what they had become in her absence before facing Ethan again. The library oak was her first stop. The massive tree still stood sentinel behind the brick building, its branches wider now, more gnarled with age. 15-year-old Mia had stood beneath these same branches on a crisp autumn day, looking up at 17-year-old Ethan as he helped her with physics homework. He'd explained something about gravitational pull, and she blurted out, "I love you," in the middle of his explanation, surprising them both. The memory was so vivid she could almost hear the rustle of falling leaves around them. Next came the beach where they'd spent countless summer days. The sand was cooler now in late spring, the tourist season not yet in full swing. Mia walked barefoot along the shoreline, letting cold waves lap at her ankles. Here, they'd built sandcastles as children and watched meteor showers as teenagers, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist, both believing their love was as vast and eternal as the stars above. Each location on the map pulled her deeper into the past. The ice cream shop where they'd shared Sundays, the school bleachers where they'd watched football games huddled under the same blanket, the harbor wall where they'd carved their initials inside a crude heart. Some places had changed. New paint, new owners, new purpose, but the memories remained intact, preserved in the amber of first love. By late afternoon, Mia found herself driving toward the final, most significant star on their map. The road to the lighthouse was more maintained than she remembered, winding along coastal cliffs until the white tower came into view, a sentinel against the endless blue horizon. She parked in the small gravel lot and followed the footpath that forked off from the main lighthouse trail. Overgrown now, it was barely visible unless you knew where to look. The path dipped through sea grass and scrubby pines until it opened to a small clearing where the caretaker's cottage stood. Mia stopped short, her breath catching. The cottage was no longer the crumbling ruin of her memory. Someone, Ethan, had been restoring it. The roof had been completely replaced, new shingles weathered to match the original style. The sagging porch had been rebuilt, its railings sturdy and freshly painted. Windows that had once been broken now gleamed in the late afternoon sun. As she approached in wonder, she noticed a weathered blue pickup truck parked behind the cottage. Ethan was here. She found him around back, installing a window frame on what would have been the ocean-facing side of the small house. He worked with focused precision, measuring twice before securing each nail, so absorbed that he didn't notice her until she was only feet away. When he looked up, surprise flashed across his features before settling into something more cautious. "Mia." Mrs. Holloway mentioned the preservation project, she said by way of explanation. "I had to see it." Ethan set down his hammer, wiping his hands on his jeans. Historical Society's been fighting the developer who bought the lighthouse property. They want to tear down the cottage, build vacation rentals. His tone was matter of fact, but she could hear the underlying passion. Place has been here since 1898. Deserves better than that. Mia moved closer, running her hand along the new clapboard siding. "You've done beautiful work." "Thanks." He watched her carefully. "What brings you out here today?" "Really?" Wordlessly, Mia reached into her pocket and unfolded the memory map. Understanding dawned in his eyes as she held it up. "You kept it," he said softly. "My dad did." She looked from the map to the cottage. "I've been visiting them. All our places." Something vulnerable flickered across his face. "Why?" "I needed to understand." She began, then paused, searching for the right words. "I left because I felt trapped here. But walking through these memories today, I realized something. It wasn't Clearwater Haven that was small. It was my vision of what my life could be." Ethan said nothing, waiting for her to continue. I've built exactly the life I thought I wanted, Mia went on. The career, the apartment in the city, the freedom to go anywhere. But standing in these places today, our places, I keep asking myself if I've been happy. Really happy. And the single word held a wealth of caution. Before she could answer, the sound of a car pulling up interrupted them. A moment later, a man in a business suit emerged from around the side of the cottage, a folder tucked under his arm. Miller, he called, then stopped short at the sight of Mia. Sorry, didn't realize you had company. It's fine, James. Ethan replied, though his posture had tensed. What's up? The man, James, glanced between them before continuing. Town councils moved up the vote. Tomorrow morning instead of Friday. He held out the folder. Thought you might want to review the final proposal before then. Ethan accepted the folder with a nod. Thanks for the heads up. After James departed, an awkward silence fell between them. Ethan looked down at the folder, then back at Mia. The vote's about the cottage? She asked. He nodded. If we don't get the historical designation, the developer starts demolition next week. His jaw tightened. I've put every spare penny into stabilizing the structure, documenting its history. If they tear it down, the unfinished sentence hung between them. Mia understood suddenly that this wasn't just about preserving a historic building. This was about preserving a dream. Their dream, the one she'd abandoned but he'd held onto in his own way. Why this place, Ethan? She asked softly, though she suspected she knew the answer. He met her gaze steadily. Some dreams are hard to let go of. The simple honesty of his response struck her with unexpected force. For 15 years, she believed she was the only one who'd sacrificed, giving up the comfort and familiarity of home for the unknown. But standing here now, she understood that Ethan had made his own sacrifices, lived with his own regrets. I've been so angry at this town, she admitted, looking out toward the ocean. Blamed it for feeling small, for making me choose between staying and becoming. But that was never the choice, was it? No, Ethan agreed quietly. The choice was whether to face your fears together or alone. The truth of his words settled between them. Neither accusation nor absolution, but simply fact. Mia looked at the cottage, at what it had been, what it was becoming, and felt something shift inside her, like pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place. Would you show me? She asked, gesturing to the cottage. What you've done with it? A cautious smile touched Ethan's lips. Sure. He led her through the small structure, pointing out original features he'd preserved alongside necessary updates. The main room still had its stone fireplace, now carefully restored. The tiny kitchen had new countertops made from reclaimed wood. Throughout, Ethan had honored the cottage's history while making it livable again. And this, he said, leading her to what would be the back bedroom, is where I had to replace the entire floor. Rod had gotten to the joists. As they stood in the empty room, sunlight streaming through new windows, Mia could almost see it as they'd imagined it at 18. A quiet retreat with an endless view of the sea. In that moment, the weight of 15 years of distance seemed to compress into nothing, as if she could reach across time itself and touch the girl she'd been, the dreams she'd discarded. We used to talk about putting a window seat right there, she said, pointing to the perfect spot beneath the largest window. For reading during storms. Surprise flickered across Ethan's face. You remember that? I remember everything, she admitted. I just didn't let myself think about it. Their eyes met in the golden afternoon light, the air between them charged with possibility and caution in equal measure. So much had changed, and yet standing here, Mia felt the unmistakable tug of what remained constant. The connection that neither time nor distance had fully severed. Ethan, she began, not entirely sure what she meant to say, only that something needed to be said. But he shook his head gently. Don't, Mia. Not yet. His voice was kind but firm. You've been back for less than a week. You're grieving your dad. This, he gestured between them. This is complicated. And I've learned the hard way not to build hopes on shifting sand. The gentle rejection stung, but Mia recognized the wisdom in it. 15 years couldn't be undone in a few emotional days. The council vote, she said instead. Is there anything I can do to help? Something like gratitude flickered in his eyes. Actually, there might be. As Robert Parker's daughter, your testimony about the historical significance of this place to the community could carry weight. Then I'll be there, she promised. First thing tomorrow. As they walked back to their separate vehicles in the fading light, the memory map folded carefully in Mia's pocket. She felt both lighter and heavier than she had in years. Lighter with the release of long-held regrets, heavier with the responsibility of newfound honesty. Whatever happened next, with the cottage, with Ethan, with her life, she knew one thing with certainty. She was done running from the past. It was time, finally, to face it, and perhaps, in facing it, to find a future she hadn't known to dream of. The town council meeting had gone better than anyone expected. Mia's impassioned speech about the lighthouse keeper's cottage, about history worth preserving, about places that held the soul of a community, had swayed even the most development-minded council members. When the final vote granted the cottage historical protection status, the small crowd of preservationists erupted in applause, none more visibly moved than Ethan, whose years of quiet persistence had finally paid off. That had been 3 days ago. 3 days of careful distance between them as Mia continued sorting through her father's house, preparing it for eventual sale. 3 days of polite waves when they happened to see each other in town, of meaningful glances quickly averted, of words left unspoken. Until the text message that arrived this morning. Bad news about the Sandpiper. Thought you should know. The Sandpiper Cafe, their cafe, where everything from first study dates to tearful consolations after her mother's funeral had played out across sticky tabletops and vinyl booths. Mia had deliberately avoided returning there since her embarrassing exit the week before. Now, standing across the street, she understood why Ethan had texted. Large white signs plastered across the windows announced in bold red letters, "Closing forever, everything must go." A smaller sign indicated the final day of business would be tomorrow. Seems like everything's changing around here. She turned to find Ethan beside her, hands in his pockets as he studied the cafe that had been a Clearwater Haven institution for over 40 years. In jeans and a simple blue button-down, he looked more put together than his usual workshop attire, almost as if he'd made an effort before reaching out to her. "Mrs. Lawson's retiring?" Mia asked, nodding toward the cafe. Ethan shook his head. Chain restaurant bought the building. Rent tripled overnight. She couldn't afford to stay even if she wanted to. That's awful. Mia felt a pang of genuine loss. Another piece of her past disappearing just as she'd rediscovered it. So many memories in that place. I thought. Ethan hesitated, suddenly looking less certain. "I thought maybe you'd want to visit it. One last time. Before it's gone." The invitation hung between them, weighted with significance beyond a simple cafe visit. This wasn't just about saying goodbye to a building. It was about acknowledging what they'd once shared there, perhaps even finding closure. "I'd like that," Mia said softly. A tentative smile touched his lips, reaching his eyes in a way that made her heart beat faster. "Tonight? They're closing early, 7 instead of 9. Thought we could have the place to ourselves, more or less." "Sounds perfect." They agreed on a time, and Mia watched him walk away, her emotions a complicated tangle. The past week had been a roller coaster. Grief for her father, shock at discovering Ethan's letter, the raw vulnerability of their conversation in the boathouse, and now this fragile new understanding between them. She wasn't sure what tonight would bring, but she knew it mattered. It mattered enormously. When evening came, Mia dressed with care, not too formal, but nicer than the jeans and t-shirts she'd been living in while cleaning out her father's house. She chose a simple sundress the color of sea glass, one that reminded her of summers long past. Her hair, usually pulled back in a practical ponytail, she left down around her shoulders. The walk to the Sandpiper took her past storefronts closing for the night, past families heading home for dinner, past tourists enjoying the mild spring evening. Clearwater Haven transformed in this gentle hour between day and night. Fishing boats returning to harbor as the first stars appeared above the eastern horizon. Ethan was waiting outside the cafe, leaning against the weathered clapboard exterior. Something in his posture straightened when he saw her, his eyes warming in a way that made her cheeks flush. He'd changed too, dark jeans and a light sweater that made his eyes look even bluer in the fading light. "You look nice," he said simply. "So do you." The words felt inadequate, schoolyard awkward, but his smile suggested he didn't mind. The bell above the door chimed as they entered. The inside of the Sandpiper was strangely quiet, most of the usual dinner crowd having heard the news and said their goodbyes already. Only two other tables were occupied, both by older couples speaking in hushed tones as if attending a wake rather than having dinner. Mrs. Lawson herself emerged from the kitchen, her round face lighting up at the sight of them. "Well, I'll be," she exclaimed, wiping her hands on her apron. "If it isn't little Mia Parker, all grown up and beautiful." She enveloped Mia in a warm hug that smelled of cinnamon and coffee. And with Ethan Miller, no less. Now there's a sight for these old eyes. Embarrassment flushed through Mia, but Mrs. Lawson just winked and led them to a booth. Their booth, by the window overlooking the harbor. "On the house tonight," she insisted when Ethan tried to protest. "My last night as owner of this old place. I'll seat who I want and charge what I want." Left alone with menus they hardly needed. Neither the Sandpipers' offerings nor their own preferences had changed much in 15 years. They fell into a silence that wasn't quite uncomfortable, but wasn't easy either. "Thank you," Ethan said finally, "for what you did at the council meeting. It made the difference." Mia shook her head. "I only told the truth. You're the one who's been fighting for years." Still, his eyes met hers across the table. "It mattered that you were there." Something in his gaze made her heart skip, the intensity, the sincerity. For a moment, she could almost believe that 15 years had never passed, that they were still those teenagers with their whole lives ahead of them, sitting in this very booth and dreaming impossible dreams. Their meals arrived, clam chowder for her, burger for him, exactly what they would have ordered at 18, and conversation shifted to safer ground. Ethan told her about the improvements he planned for the cottage now that its future was secure. Mia shared stories from her publishing career in Boston, carefully edited to focus on the positives. It was pleasant, this careful dance around their shared history. Pleasant but superficial, like skimming stones across deep water without acknowledging the depths below. As they finished their meals, Mrs. Lawson approached their table again, this time with a small wooden box in her hands. "Been clearing out some old things from the back," she said, setting the box between them. "Found this. Thought you two might want it." Before either could respond, she was gone, leaving them staring at the worn wooden box with tarnished brass hinges. Ethan's name was carved clumsily into one side, the work of an obviously younger hand. "Is that," Mia began. "My memory box," Ethan finished, looking as surprised as she felt. "I forgot all about this." 17-year-old Ethan had discovered a secret compartment beneath the floorboards of their regular booth, likely created by some previous teenage patron. He'd converted it into a time capsule of sorts, a place to store mementos of their relationship. With careful fingers, Ethan lifted the lid. Inside, preserved as if no time had passed at all, lay the physical artifacts of first love. Movie ticket stubs, a pressed flower from prom, a napkin with Mia's lipstick print, Polaroid photos with dates scribbled on white borders, a mix CD with a handwritten playlist. "I can't believe she kept this all these years," Mia whispered, reaching for a folded piece of notebook paper. Her breath caught as she recognized her own handwriting, a love note passed during calculus class, full of inside jokes and declarations of eternal devotion. "Me neither." Ethan's voice was thick with emotion as he picked up a small shell they'd found on a midnight beach walk, worn smooth by years of tumbling in the surf. One by one, they explored the contents, each item unlocking memories both had tried to forget. There was laughter, over the embarrassingly earnest poetry Ethan had written, over the cheesy Valentine's card Mia had spent hours selecting. There were moments of quiet reflection, examining the friendship bracelet she'd made him, which he'd worn until it literally fell apart, reviewing the community college brochures they'd collected, planning futures that never materialized. As they reached the bottom of the box, Ethan's hand stilled. With obvious reluctance, he withdrew a small velvet pouch. "I wondered what happened to this," he said quietly. Mia watched as he loosened the drawstring and tipped the contents into his palm. A delicate silver ring set with a small sapphire, obviously vintage, obviously precious. "Your grandmother's ring," she whispered, recognizing it from the letter. "The one you were going to propose with." Ethan nodded, turning the ring so it caught the light. "Must have put it in here after you left. Couldn't bear to look at it, I guess." The weight of what might have been settled over their table. 15 years of separate lives, separate choices, separate paths, all hinging on a proposal never made, a question never asked, an answer never given. "Do you ever wonder?" Mia asked, her voice barely audible above the quiet murmur of the nearly empty cafe. What might have happened if I'd shown up that night? If I'd said yes? Ethan's eyes met hers, a lifetime of what-ifs reflected in their blue depths. Every day for 15 years, he admitted. Then a little less often. Then just sometimes. But yeah, I wonder. Outside, twilight had deepened into true night. The harbor lights reflected on dark water. The cafe would close in 20 minutes. This chapter of their lives ending definitively with the turn of Mrs. Lawson's key in the lock. I was so certain I was doing the right thing, Mia said softly. So sure that staying would mean sacrificing everything I wanted. But sitting here now, I can't help thinking about what I sacrificed by leaving. She gestured to the box between them. All of this. Us. You built a good life, Mia, Ethan said, and there was no bitterness in his voice, only a gentle acceptance. The life you needed to build. But what if it's not the life I need anymore? The question escaped before she could consider its implications. What if coming back here, seeing you again, what if it's showing me everything that was missing? The air between them charged with possibility. Ethan carefully returned the ring to its pouch, then closed the box with deliberate movements, buying time to compose his response. Mia, he began cautiously, a lot has happened this week. Your dad, the house, finding my letter, the cottage vote. It's a lot to process. I don't want to be something you rush into because you're feeling nostalgic or regretful. His words stung with their truth. Was that all this was, nostalgia? A grief-induced yearning for simpler times? Mia wasn't sure, and her uncertainty must have shown on her face. I'm not saying no, Ethan continued, his voice softening. I'm saying, not yet. Not like this. If there's something real here, something that could last, it'll still be real when the dust settles. Before Mia could respond, Mrs. Lawson appeared at their table, apologetic but firm. Last call, you two. Gotta close up shop in 10 minutes. They gathered the contents of the memory box, carefully returning each item to its place. Mrs. Lawson insisted they take it with them. What am I going to do with a box of teenage love notes? She'd scoffed. And soon they found themselves standing outside the darkening cafe, the closing sign illuminated in neon behind them. I should get back, Mia said, though she made no move to leave. Ethan nodded, equally stationary. The wooden box was cradled in his arms like something precious and fragile. Let me walk you home. The familiar streets of Clearwater Haven were quiet as they strolled toward her father's house, the memory box between them both physically and metaphorically. They didn't speak much, but the silence was companionable rather than awkward, a shared acknowledgement that whatever was happening between them needed time and space to unfold naturally. At her father's front porch, they paused. Moths danced around the porch light, casting erratic shadows across Ethan's features as he carefully handed her the box. I think you should keep this, he said. At least for now. Mia accepted it, her fingers brushing his in the exchange. Thank you. For tonight. For understanding. He smiled, the expression reaching his eyes in a way that made her heart contract. 15 years is a long time to learn patience, Mia Parker. As she watched him walk back down the street, the memory box in her arms and the taste of possibilities on her lips, Mia realized something fundamental had shifted. For the first time since returning to Clearwater Haven, she wasn't counting the days until she could leave again. Instead, she was wondering what might happen if she stayed. Morning arrived as it always did in Clearwater Haven, with the gentle symphony of gulls, the distant hum of fishing boats setting out, and light that seemed to kiss everything it touched with golden warmth. Mia stood at the edge of her father's property, watching the sunrise with a cup of coffee warming her hands. 3 weeks had passed since that night at the Sandpiper. 3 weeks of quiet transformation. The for sale sign she'd planned to put in the yard remained in the trunk of her car, gathering dust alongside her return ticket to Boston. Each time she'd tried to take either out, something stopped her. A memory, a possibility, a question still unanswered. In those 3 weeks, Clearwater Haven had slowly shifted from a place she'd escaped to a place she was rediscovering. She'd found herself volunteering at the town's Maritime Museum, offering her editors eye to their neglected brochures. She'd joined the Saturday morning beach cleanups, where she'd reconnected with old classmates whose lives seemed less stifling than she'd once imagined. She'd even started sorting through her father's fishing gear, learning the names and purposes of each lure and line from the old-timers at the tackle shop who'd known her dad for decades. And Ethan, They'd established a careful friendship. Coffee at the new cafe that had opened near the harbor. Afternoon walks along the beach. He'd invited her to help with the cottage restoration on weekends, teaching her how to sand weathered boards without erasing their character, how to mix paint to match the original coastal hue. Always respectful, never pushing, giving her the space he'd promised that night outside the sandpiper. The memory box sat on her bedside table, opened and examined piece by piece each night before sleep. Not with regret exactly, but with a growing understanding of the girl she'd been and the woman she'd become. Now, as she watched the horizon where sea met sky in a perfect watercolor blend, Mia made her decision. She pulled her phone from her pocket, dialed a familiar Boston number, and waited. Matthews Publishing, Caroline speaking. Caroline, it's Mia Parker. Mia, we've been wondering when you'd check in. The Stevenson manuscript is piling up red flags without your eagle eye. When are you planning to return? Your leave ends next week, right? Mia took a deep breath, watching a pair of pelicans dive into the glittering water. Actually, that's why I'm calling. I need to extend my leave. Indefinitely. The silence on the other end stretched for several beats. Indefinitely? Mia, you've worked towards senior editor for 10 years. Jenkins is talking about grooming you for editorial director when he retires. I know. She closed her eyes, picturing her sleek Boston office with its view of the harbor, so different from this wild coastline, yet somehow less alive. But I need to stay in Clearwater Haven for now. Is this about your father's estate? Because we can arrange. It's about finding something I didn't know I was missing, Mia interrupted gently. Caroline, I'm not quitting publishing. I'm just exploring what it might look like from a different coast. After a few minutes of negotiation, promises of freelance editing, and Caroline's reluctant blessing, Mia ended the call. A weight she hadn't known she was carrying lifted from her shoulders as she slipped the phone back into her pocket. The morning stretched before her with new purpose. She finished her coffee, went inside to shower and change, then slipped the velvet pouch from the memory box into her pocket. There was somewhere she needed to be. The lighthouse path was busy with morning joggers and tourists, but Mia took the familiar fork that led to the caretaker's cottage. The transformation since her first visit 3 weeks ago was remarkable. New window panes gleamed in the morning light. The porch had been stained a rich honey color, and climbing roses had been planted along the south wall. Ethan's truck wasn't there yet. It was early, after all, so Mia settled on the porch steps to wait, watching boats trace white paths across the distant bay. The velvet pouch weighed heavy in her pocket, a talisman of possibilities. When the familiar blue pickup finally crested the hill, her heart quickened. She stood as Ethan parked and approached, carrying coffee and a paper bag from the bakery that had replaced the sandpiper. Wasn't expecting company, he said, genuine pleasure warming his voice. Especially not before 8 on a Saturday. I've been thinking, Mia said without preamble, watching surprise register on his face at her directness. About what you said that night. About dust settling. He set the coffee and pastries on the porch rail, his eyes never leaving hers. And has it settled? I think it has. She pulled the velvet pouch from her pocket, holding it in her open palm between them. I found this in the memory box last night. It wasn't in there when we left the sandpiper. Ethan's gaze dropped to the pouch, his expression unreadable. I may have slipped it back in while you weren't looking. Why? He shrugged, a gesture that conveyed more vulnerability than casualness. Felt like it belonged with you. With the memories. I called my boss in Boston this morning, Mia said, changing direction. Asked for an indefinite leave of absence. That got his attention. His eyes snapped up to meet hers, caution and hope warring in their blue depths. That's significant. I thought about what you said, about rushing into something because of nostalgia or regret. She took a step closer to him. You were right. I needed time to figure out if what I was feeling was real or just echoes. Around them, the sounds of the coast provided gentle accompaniment. Waves against rocks below, gulls calling overhead, the soft breath of wind through seagrass. In the stillness between them, 15 years of separation seemed to compress into a single heartbeat. And Ethan asked, the single word carrying the weight of unspoken hopes. And I realized something. I didn't leave Clearwater Haven because I didn't love you enough. I left because I didn't love myself enough to believe I could become who I needed to be while loving you too. She held the velvet pouch out to him. When he took it, Their fingers brushed in a touch that sent electricity skittering across her skin. I'm not 18 anymore, she continued softly. I know who I am now. What I want. What matters. Ethan's fingers closed around the pouch, his eyes never leaving hers. And what does matter, Mia Parker? Connection. Purpose. Feeling anchored without feeling trapped. She gestured to the cottage behind them. Building something that lasts, whether it's a book or a boat or a home. The beginning of a smile touched Ethan's lips, cautious but real. That sounds suspiciously like something a Clearwater Haven local might say. Maybe it is. Mia returned his smile. Or maybe it's something a woman who's finally stopped running might say. Ethan opened the velvet pouch, tipping his grandmother's ring into his palm. The sapphire caught the morning light, sending blue fire dancing across their skin. So what happens now? I'm not asking you to propose again, Mia said quickly. That's not why I brought the ring. I just wanted you to know I'm staying. Not forever, necessarily, but long enough to find out if we can build something real from the ashes of what we were. Something new, Ethan suggested, his voice softening. Not just memories. Yes. Relief flooded through her at his understanding. Something that honors the past without being trapped by it. Ethan carefully returned the ring to its pouch and slipped it into his pocket. Then, with the deliberate movements of a man who had learned the value of patience, he reached for her hand. His palm was warm against hers, calloused from years of working with wood and water, steady in a way that made her feel safe rather than confined. I'd like that, he said simply, to build something new with you. The kiss, when it came, was nothing like the desperate embraces of their youth. It was gentle, exploratory, carrying the weight of experience and loss and the precious tendrils of new beginnings. Mia felt tears prick behind her closed eyelids, not from sadness, but from the profound realization that sometimes the longest journeys lead back to where you started, but with eyes that finally see clearly. When they parted, Ethan rested his forehead against hers, their breath mingling in the small space between them. So, he whispered, want to help me install kitchen cabinets today? Mia laughed, the sound carrying across the cliffs and out to sea. That's your idea of romance, Miller? Kitchen cabinets. Hey, I'm playing the long game here, he replied, his eyes crinkling with the smile she'd never been able to forget. First cabinets, then countertops. Before you know it, we'll be arguing about bathroom tiles and window treatments. Sounds suspiciously like a future. Could be. He kissed her again, briefly. If you're interested. Mia looked past him to the cottage. Their cottage, its structure sound, its interior waiting to be finished, its windows facing open water and endless possibilities. Then back to Ethan, whose patience had outlasted her fear, whose love had weathered absence and return. I'm interested, she said, feeling the truth of it settle into her bones like belonging. In fact, I think I'll stay for the whole renovation. As they climbed the porch steps together, fingers intertwined, the morning light bathed the cottage in promises of what could be. 15 years had brought them full circle, not to reclaim what was lost, but to discover what might still be found when hearts are brave enough to try again. Behind them, the lighthouse beams swept across brightening waters, guiding not only ships to harbor, but two souls back to each other. Finally, after all this time, home.